Hello. Hello, everyone. We have people here very promptly today. We may just give it 1 minute or two, just while other people join. If you're here already, give us a shout out in the chat, depending on where you're from. Tell us where you're signing in from today. Hey, Rob, good to see you. Hello, everybody else. Okay, I think we can get started because we've got a packed agenda today, lots to talk about. So thank you everyone for joining today for the webinar. You've seen the subject, Solve Kafka's Weaknesses. Really excited to speak to Jean-Louis today about Conduktor Gateway and what we can do for the enterprise in regards to meeting governance, security, and self-service needs. So without further ado, fire away.
James, would you like to introduce a bit the house rules for this webinar?
Yes, so this is a webinar. It's supposed to be engaging, so please do interact. If things spark your interest, if you want us to stop, ask questions throughout the webinar, then please do send them into the chat. You can react. We've got a couple of polls, which we're going to send through. In fact, I'm going to even send one through in a second just to test that works. But yeah, ultimately, this is supposed to be a two-way engagement throughout the webinar. So please make use of the tools.
So let's start by introducing ourselves. James, I'll let you start first.
Sure thing. So I'm James. Nice to meet you. If you've joined one of these webinars before, you may have met me. I'm Director of Product here at Conduktor. Very excited to be hosting Jean-Louis today from the customer success team. So Jean-Louis, maybe a bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jean-Louis. I'm a part of the pre-sales team here at Conduktor, and I'm also part of the customer success, helping on the support and onboarding of our customers. Just a little bit of background about myself. I've been in the Kafka ecosystem for a while, both from the dev and ops side. And prior to Conduktor, I was working for Confluent as part of the professional services and customer success architect team, which means I helped a huge amount of large customers to be successful with Kafka or not shoot themselves in the foot with Kafka. And as part of the journey there, I've been constantly asked about products that can help to enforce governance rules, to enforce best practices, to provide autonomy, move forward the direction of self-service. And can you guess, I decided to join Conduktor because we are building those products. So in order to explain what we do or what will be the topic of today, I need to give a bit of introduction and open the chakras of everyone in the audience. So you probably know that one of the leaders on the Kafka ecosystem is obviously Confluent. When I was back in the days at Confluent, they have this dream or this vision of the maturity curve where there is people that have early interest, that are discovering Kafka, that are moving towards the direction of using Kafka, then that puts the first project in production, then move towards putting critical projects in production, one that can really impact your business, and hopefully to move towards the direction of using Kafka for what it was designed for, to break the silos, to free the data within the organization, to connect line of business, and to share data across maybe part of the organization, to move towards the direction of central nervous system. The reality is that this adoption curve is not that smooth in reality. And if you want to be successful, you need to invest early into either people or tooling. And if you don't do that, reality is that you might be being closer to the purple line in this diagram, where you might get a central team that is doing everything, usually set up in Kafka, even if you are on cloud, and trying to put a bit of governance, automation, and monitoring, and all sorts of challenges. But quickly enough, this central team might be victim of their own success to a certain extent, and they will need to choose their battle. And this is explainable simply because when you start with Kafka, you usually have early adopters, people that want to use the technology for the right reason, that follow training. But as the usage grows, we've seen from the fields that in most of the organization, Kafka adoption is exponential. And this means that it's like Spider-Man, right? With great powers comes great responsibility. The more you will get projects, the more there might be a chance that some of them might be behind, not necessarily aware, coming from a different queuing system, and they need to be equipped. They need to be educated. So if we try to summarize what are the challenges nowadays in customer organization, the first one is pretty obvious. Everybody in 2023 wants to deliver faster, and everybody is targeting time to market. We want to be more efficient, to deliver faster our application. And obviously, if we have organizational bottleneck, that's probably the right moment to try to address them. On the flip side, because Kafka is great, but you don't know all the unknown unknowns, there is a huge problem around awareness, right? Everybody knows Kafka. It's easy to produce and consume, but you need data exploration. You need to be reassured, especially when you are new to the technology, to understand, is there a lag on my application? Is my application behind? Has this message been published into Kafka? So this is what we call the data exploration. You need some form of tooling or I would say maturity to feel comfortable. And you need awareness as well, right? What are the common issues that I might face as a project with Kafka? And all of that leads to a bigger challenge, which is more difficult, I would say, is that once you grow with the usage of Kafka, you might get new challenges around security and governance, right? How can you put the right foundations, ideally early, to make sure that tomorrow you will be able to scale to 200 projects, 500 projects, thousands of projects that might be using Kafka and being all interdependent? And how, from a security point of view, you might address PII data, GDPR, compliance, and all of that. James, would you like to speak about this?
I'm curious, based on the poll we asked at the start of the call, you haven't seen the think was the most common challenge that people are facing based on here today. Do you have a guess?
No.
Well, I can help you because maybe it can steer the session today and we can focus on that particularly, but looks like developer autonomy, so self-service, giving developers the freedom to kind of operate, troubleshoot on Kafka, etc., was the most, followed by people gaining troubleshooting or visibility into Kafka. So aligns quite closely, I think, with two of the things we'll cover today.
Right.
So moving on, as Jean-Louis just said, he's just introduced a bit around, the common challenges as you start to adopt Kafka inside your organization. So where does Conduktor step in and how do we help? Essentially, we're here to guide you throughout that journey. We're not just here to enable through tools and processes, although we will focus a lot on tooling today, but also through, partnership with you based on a wealth of Kafka experience within the company. Many of you may be familiar with Conduktor Desktop for years. It may have been the first tool you used to operate with Kafka. And over the years, we've got the expertise of having dealt with 15,000 plus companies and over 100,000 developers. Just to give you a flavor into the types of industries and the types of customers that we're already helping, as you can see here, we're tried and tested across many different industries, be it financial services, be it retail, be it ad tech, be it gaming, be it tech. Ultimately, we're helping everybody on their data streaming journey everywhere.
And the most beautiful part of that is that our solutions are basically agnostic of the Kafka vendor. So it will work whether you're using open source Kafka, AWS MSK, even Confluent, Cloudera, or even other Kafka compatible solution like Red Panda or other technologies like that. So how can Conduktor help to accelerate the Kafka journey, right? There is a lot of areas where we can potentially equip you. Today, we are not going to cover necessarily all of them, but obviously, one that is often requested, and it was the case in the poll today, is everything around data exploration and observability. We need a set of tools to understand how our applications are behaving and help us to find a needle in the haystack. But similar to that, we can help as well in terms of best practices and enforcing them, because there is a lot of responsibilities in Kafka that are managed at the cluster level by the central team, but some of the responsibility are depending on how the application is designed or configured. And maybe it will be great to ensure that you that just started have the application properly configured at the organization level according to the company policy to make sure that, for example, you don't lose data. It may be possible as well that we can help you around data mesh. So data mesh is a very popular world nowadays where everybody would like to move towards the direction of self-service. I'm going to simplify it at my level. Projects want to deliver faster, and for that, they want to have a bit of autonomy. But don't get me wrong, autonomy doesn't necessarily remove control, right? There is good reasons why today you cannot necessarily create topics, and we are going to see how we can help with those challenges. It can be as well on the multi-tenancy where over your usage of Kafka, maybe you are working in a very hostile environment where you cannot run a local Kafka cluster because you don't have Docker, and running a cluster locally might be challenging for you, and you might need to be fully isolated from the other developer of your team. That way you can work on feature branch or that kind of stuff. Maybe you need to have virtual environments because you know what, the infrastructure thought about dev, staging, and prod, but you need a fourth environment, which is training or UAT2 or whatever. And we can as well help on the data protection. James, would you like to speak about it?
Absolutely. So we see this in kind of two flavors. One would be if you are using our console product today, you need a way to be able to enable developer autonomy in an environment that's safe and governed for your environment. And what that might mean is making sure that certain data, certain fields on certain schemas are masked so that your developers can troubleshoot production, but they're not able to see, customer names or PII data. In the same vein as that, we're conscious that there's sometimes a need for encrypting data at rest, and therefore you might need a solution that's more in line with your applications that are producing data into Kafka. And for that, we're going to speak obviously about Conduktor Gateway as perhaps being a solution to that today. I'm happy to take the next up. So on the role-based access control, it kind of goes hand in hand with what I just mentioned around providing a safe and governed area. You need to provide the right level of permissions based on that user's role inside your organization. You want to be able to allocate permissions to users. You also want to be able to allocate them to groups. And what comes with that is the need to provide visibility of who did what with which resource and when in your system. So having auditability of everything that's going on inside your Kafka ecosystem, who created that topic, who restarted that connector. All of those actions and controls are audited within Conduktor, and obviously you're able to provide them to meet compliance and regulation standards. And the last one, I think John Liu will hopefully get to it this afternoon, but in regards to disaster recovery and failover, how can you seamlessly fail over from one Kafka instance to another? And how can you do this in a way that requires little human interaction and ensures that you have minimal downtime? So we'll allude to that a bit later today as well.
So for all of those features, we basically have two main products. Console. James, would you like to explain from a high level what console is and what it can provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So If you were ever familiar with Conduktor Desktop, or you are familiar with console already, essentially this is our web interface that allows developers to interact with Kafka. And we see this really in kind of in 4 veins, 4 values you can get out of this. So one would be about data exploration and getting that visual insight into Kafka. So being able to view your topics, your subjects, your consumer groups, your ACLs, see Kafka Connect all inside one central location, even if it's across multiple clusters. And of course, you can do that inside the Conduktor console, and you can collaborate with your team. You can construct a view and you can send it to your colleague if you see something that looks strange or erroneous. The second vein we look into is troubleshooting. Let's suggest something's happened in production, or you need to find that needle in a haystack. You need to find the poison pill that's causing your system to fail. How can we enable you to go into a system and give you the tools to be able to find and resolve that as speedy as possible? From an operations perspective, all of the
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? The fire alarm system is about to be tested.
A fire alarm in here.
I will take over, James, don't worry. So from an operation perspective, it might be about adding partitions or checking the lag of a given application, because we need to remember that sometimes there is support team that needs to be equipped as well, from the application perspective. And you might need, obviously, a bit of observability. So the goal, or our target at Conduktor, is not necessarily to equip operation team to fully monitor their Kafka cluster, but mainly to equip projects or developers so they can get an understandable view of the 2 million metrics that exist in Kafka. At a high level, the console is pretty simple. It's a Docker image that you can deploy in your ecosystem, and various people from your organization, developer, QA, support, platform team, architects, can interact with it. That platform relies on a database, Postgres, to store some metadata, like who can do what is the audit log, what are maybe the metadata we associated with topics to make it easier to find, what are the filters that have been applied by my developers, and so on. This console is able to talk to one or multiple Kafka clusters, and from an authentication perspective, it can be plugged to your source of truth in terms of identity, which can be LDAP, Active Directory, or OpenID.
One of the benefits of that being, obviously, you can bring your existing source of truth for users, and we do have some features around being able to sync your external groups to make that as seamless possible as well. I'm back, by the way. The fire alarm was a false alarm, I think.
One important point is that the UI can already provide you a set of tools to go towards the direction of self-service. If you think about it, either you are at the beginning of your journey, and every time you need to create or manage assets, you need to make a request to the central team to create the topic, to increase the retention, to change the permission. As such, you are creating this friction, having this bottleneck, and there is no value add. It's kind of error prone. It adds delay, which can be difficult for projects. And when you become more mature, some customer can go into the direction of providing an API to make that life easier to project, or can try to move towards the direction of providing a GitOps approach. This is fine, but it's the easiest part of the problem. There are API out there to create topics. There are API to manage permission, but someone needs to validate it. And as I said, right, there is good reasons why you cannot create topics. The more you can create topics, the more you will impact the capacity planning. And having a pull request or a GitOps approach won't solve that problem. And by accident, while trying to make a good intent, trying to fluidify this process, you became responsible by accident of the permission management. And projects are ultimately interdependent. Project A would like to access the data of project B. And then the question is, who should be validating that? Is it the central team? If you are a large organization, it might be tricky. If you are a small team, it can work. But over time, it will become more and more challenging. So within console, there is 2 ways of managing permission. Either it's managed by a central team, or we have this self-service / topic as a service, where we basically have a catalog of application, and each application has a data owner, whoever that is in your organization, and that person is fully responsible of managing the permission of his own project, which can be from a human perspective or from an application perspective. And this can be a great complement to your GitOps approach. Today, we won't showcase that, but if you go on our YouTube channel, you might be an amazing video from Stefan Marek on that subject. But today, we are here to talk about Gateway. And Gateway is a recent product that we have been co-building with a set of customers that have been design partners that we have revealed around Kafka Summit, and that is getting a lot of traction. And why did we create this Gateway? It's simply because there is a set of gaps in Kafka today. Even if we love Kafka, there are some things that could be improved. Okay, and what can this Gateway do? A lot of things that I'm going to showcase today. But both products are complementary and can help to achieve what is mentioned here. James, would you like to speak about it?
Yeah, so I think on the previous slide, everything we alluded to with the Conduktor console, one of the main takeaways I would like to emphasize is the console is, your mechanism for how your users will interact with Kafka, performing operations, be it topic creation, managing consumer groups, and getting visibility into the Kafka data. But one of the common questions we always had when we presented solutions on the console, such as data masking, was, okay, this is great, but is the data really masked on the wire? Okay, and the answer was no. It wasn't a full solution. So really, we introduced Conduktor Gateway to take care of the other side. And of course, as you can see by the diagram here, what we're really talking about is how do you bring some of that enhanced functionality into the actual applications that are interacting with Kafka. And the great thing is, as Jean-Louis alluded to, they can complement each other. So maybe you can steer some of those actions, some of those configurations and rules from within the console for the gateway as well. We're not there yet, but obviously you'll see a glimpse of today of where we're going, and some of the things that Jean-Louis is going to allude to are going to show you how you can introduce things like federated control. What we mean here is, how do you introduce business rules so that you can give developers the freedom to operate in Kafka, but still enforce business rules, business standards, such as topic naming strategies, such as max number of partitions when you create a topic. The other things we're going to touch on are data and application security. So as I alluded to with the data masking scenario, how do I enforce security, but actually on the Kafka wire rather than inside the Conduktor user interface? Self-service we'll talk about a lot, I won't go into that. And then cost reduction. So what opportunities do I have with the gateway, with this proxy that sits in between my client applications and my physical Kafka cluster to reduce some of the costs that I might be incurring with my Kafka provider today? So over to you, Jean-Louis, to I think start getting stuck into some demos.
Yeah, so the first disclaimer that I will put is, as I said, right, even if we love Kafka, there is some gaps today. I can name a few. We were initially saying that a lot of people in this room are interested by the self-service. Today, in the Kafka ecosystem, either you have permission to create topics or you don't. But there is no way when you create a topic to put constraints of the number of partition or the retention or the attributes that you can change. There is no way of doing built-in multi-tenancy. For sure, you can have a cluster that is multi-tenant, but there is no way of having two customers' topic without having them that collide, right? And that feature exists in other queuing technologies such as Pulsar. There is no way of doing filtering on the server side, like MQ was providing back in the days. And as you see, with all those changes, we were like, okay, it's probably the right time to try to do something. So one way could be to educate people. We tried. We have Kafkademy that is helping in that front. Another way could be to try to fork Kafka, but not sure you will be pleased to see yet another vendor in the ecosystem just to get those extra capabilities. Another one could have been to create a framework that could be embedded in the application, but we will need to deal with compatibility, cross-language compatibility, and it's always a mess. So we decided, no. Let's try to put an intermediate layer that will act as a gateway or as a proxy between application on the left side of the diagram to the Kafka cluster. So what does that mean? That means that I can connect applications, right, to talk to the gateway like if it was a Kafka cluster. And I'm going to illustrate that. And through an API, I'm going to basically manage the gateway dynamically to enforce rules or enable certain features. The main advantage or the main benefit is that we can augment the Kafka protocol with a lot of features that I'm going to showcase today. And last but not least, we won't change anything. From an application point of view, as a developer, it's like talking to a Kafka cluster. So I'm going to start a little demo. Do you see my screen, and is it big enough?
We do indeed. It looks good for me, so I think you're good to go.
If it's not big enough, I can zoom in later. Please tell me in the chat. So I'm going to start a local Kafka cluster environment with a 2-node Kafka cluster, and I'm going to put gateway close to it, and I'm going to start a couple of other components just for the sake of the demo. I'm going to run a script to make my life easier for the demo. And the first thing that I need to explain is how does that work? So today, when you talk to Kafka, you need to authenticate, right? You need to have credentials. So in order to replicate that, that's not the only way we do support authentication within the gateway, but I'm going to make a call to the gateway API. Port 8088 in my environment is the gateway. And I'm going to say, can you please create a user that is called Tom? And in return, I will get a generated token. And if you look at what you see here, it should sound familiar to some of the characteristics that you have today when you are connecting your producer and your consumer application. So what we can do from there is that we can try to use the CLI, because the CLI is a generic Kafka client, right? And if it works with the CLI, it means it will work with your Java application, with Flink, with Kafka Stream, KSQL, and Connect. What I'm going to do, I'm going to list topics, and at the moment, there is none. Fine, that's fine. The environment is empty. I'm going to create a topic called cars, right? I'm able to create the topic, and I'm able to check that the topic is there, that I can produce data into it using Kafka Console Producer, and I'm able to consume data as well. So what I've just proven here is that the gateway, because if you see in all the example, I'm pointing to the gateway that is acting as a Kafka broker. From an application point of view, I'm talking to a Kafka cluster. So this is great, but what is the need? One need could be to simplify your complexity. If you're on the operation side, you might know that introducing new brokers can be challenging because you need to make them routable, you need to open firewalls and so on. So here you can potentially hide some of the complexity of your infrastructure behind the gateway. But what is more important is that you can leverage that to do multi-tenancy. So I'm going to get back to the slide. We have been interviewing a lot of customers, and multi-tenancy is a subjective thing, right? Everybody believes because they have one Kafka cluster that they are doing multi-tenancy. And in a sense, they are right. Multi-tenancy is the fact that you might need to isolate things at a given extent within your organization. Things could be a project, a domain, a business unit, sometimes an environment, right? So the granularity will depend on the constraint of your environment. But ultimately, every time you start talking about isolation, you might need to isolate resources. And at Kafka level, we are talking about topics and consumer groups and transactions. So today, you might already have multi-tenancy cluster. That's great. But there is some challenges down the road. As I said, one example could be, I have a developer, we are working in a hostile environment, let's say a bank. having Docker is difficult, right? How can I provide a little environment for each developer in the same Kafka cluster? Oh, I can try to play with the naming convention. Unfortunately, I'm going to put a lot of complexity on the project side because they will need to change in their configuration the topic name and the permissions. It's going to be tricky. Another use case is potentially I want to have a virtual environment, and maybe I thought about that. I have a production cluster, a non-prod cluster. In the non-prod cluster, I thought about dev and UAT. What if tomorrow someone comes and say, I want a temporary environment? Should I create a new cluster? Should I break my naming convention? So here we can solve some of those challenges with our gateway and how we can create a tenant. Remember, it's an isolation layer. And within each tenant, we can have the same thing. So I can have a cluster called Paris, a cluster called London. And in both, I can have the same topic, the same consumer groups. This is great. Talk is cheap. Show me real stuff. At the beginning of the presentation, you remember we created a user called Tom. And we published data in a cars topic within the Tom tenant. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to create another tenant. Let's call it Emma. That's one of the second developer that is working for us on the gateway on our side. I'm going to get a credential like earlier. I'm going to list the topics. And if I list the topic as if it was Emma, I see nothing. I've not touched any ACL. Good news, Emma is fully isolated. But if I go further and I try to create a cars topic, it's going to work. By the way, you can see I have some network connectivity issues. Hopefully it will be okay in the presentation, but it might create a bit of chaos in the which will spice a bit the webinar. But here I've been able to create the topic. I can verify that it exists, and I can even try to read from it. And because I'm reading from the cars topic of Emma, I should see nothing because nobody published into it. So how the hell is that possible, right? We have two different tenants that have the same topic name, cars, that are fully isolated on the same Kafka cluster. Whoa. Okay, let's reveal the magic. If we talk directly to the Kafka cluster, you might see that the topic has been aliased or prefixed on the fly by the name of the tenant. This is the default behavior. That's something we can customize. But this is very handy because you can leverage this to try to have fully isolated environment without having naming clash on topics, consumer group, and so on. Very handy to create virtual environments.
We had a question, Jean-Louis, from Dan, and I think you pretty much just covered it. But Dan said that the multi-tenancy is sharing brokers. So I'm guessing that some manipulation of topic names, etc., which the gateway is masking. So it's exactly what
we are doing.
Yeah.
And we have a customer that abused about that to try to get rid of the security model in Kafka. That customer didn't like at all, the original security model. That was a customer that wanted to go into the data mesh world, trying to provide a kind of a bounded context for a given project, a kind of a namespace, right? And within that namespace, which can call a tenant, they can do everything they want. But at some point in his journey, he discovered that, what a guess, project can be interdependent. And at some point, project A might need to access data of project B. And can you guess? We do provide APIs or mapping that can help to try to map things that already exist and make them read-only so it can be visible. So I'm going to illustrate that, but I'm going to get a bit further because I want to spice the things. So I'm going to make a call to the API of the gateway. I'm going to say that I would like to map a topic called red cars into a physical topic that is called Tom cars, the one we created previously. And I'm going to tell the gateway, please make that topic virtual, like if it was an alias. So if you think about it, this API could be a way of making things visible, but also could be a way of addressing one of the current limitations, even if there is work in progress in Kafka, renaming topics. But can we do more? Because there is a point if I put a red cars topic. Maybe the point is that we would like to have filtering on the server side. And here I'm applying kind of a SQL statement to say, can you please only give me the type and the price field from the red cars, but only where the color is red. And the other thing you might notice is that during this demo, every time we are going to interact with the gateway, we are going to define where we are going to apply this restriction. And the gateway is implemented on an interceptor chain pattern. So we can either intercept request or response. Because we want to affect the behavior of the consumer, here I'm going to affect the response of a fetch request when you consume data from Kafka. So if you look at the data sets, you remember originally we inserted cars, red Ferrari, black Rolls-Royce, black Mercedes, right? So it will be amazing if I tried to consume from red cars and I was only able to see the Ferrari red.
You're good.
Okay, great.
Don't worry.
I was looking at the chat. So you can think about this as a way of trying to mitigate sometimes the creation of topics. Because if you have to do that today in your Kafka cluster, what will be the alternative? One of the alternatives could be to ask every consumer of your organization, especially if you are freeing the data, right, to apply a filtering rule. But if you are moving towards the direction of a cloud service, if someone fetch 100% of the data, but they only need 2% of the data, it's kind of a shame. So you are losing bandwidth, and sometimes you are charged on it. Similarly, an alternative to try to kill that problem could be to materialize the result of this projection in a physical topic. That's what you can do with Kafka Stream, with Flink, with even KSQL. But more topics means more infrastructure, ultimately. Here, the beauty of it is that we can do that dynamically, making that transparent and offering us a new way of thinking our use cases. If we are targeting high throughput, let's create a physical topic. But if we are talking about something that should be freed across the organization and we are just having a data pipeline, maybe we can leverage that as an intermediate layer to try to mitigate a bit what I call the topic explosion pattern. Make sense to everyone?
Does indeed. We got one more question maybe before we move on from Guillermo. So does SQL support Avro and protobuf formats?
Yes.
Brilliant.
And one question that might be popping in your head is, how is this comparable to KSQL? I would say it's similar in the sense that we are using a SQL language, but the main difference is that KSQL is materializing the result in a physical topic, where here we are playing with the virtualization and trying to make you cost reduction. Right? Most probably, if you want stateful requests like aggregation, join, use KSQL or use Kafka Stream or use Flink. But if you just have a simple data pipeline, need to work on a subset of data, this could be an option. So what else can we do with this gateway? We talk about multi-tenancy. Let's talk about safeguarding. So safeguarding for us is the capability of trying to put rules in place to try to prevent you from doing bad things or to try to encourage you to do the right things. So the first disclaimer is that it can be used to complement our UI experience or your GitOps pipeline by trying to put rules in place to provide self-service. So if you think about it, today, you cannot create topics because there is no restriction. What if tomorrow this gateway can help you to put restriction and say, in order to provide self-service, I want company-wide people to be able to create topics with at least 2 partitions, because otherwise let's use another queuing technology, and up to 6 partitions. And if you're in that range, you shouldn't be talking to a human. But if we move towards and you are successful, maybe you are having extra, you need to discuss with a human to be challenged and so on. Similarly, it can be about best practices, right? How can I make sure that you have properly configured the acknowledgement level and you are not going to lose data? How can I make sure that you are not aggressively batching and putting a lot of pressure on the cluster? So let's demonstrate all of that. So you remember earlier, we created a cars topic. This is badly configured. Replication factor is 1, which means the data is not replicated. So resiliency, there is also only one partition. So what's the point of using Kafka if I just use one partition? That's arguable. So let's try to see how the gateway can help me to solve those problems. So as I said, right, we can configure everything through API. So I'm going to say every time someone is going to create something within the Tom tenant, I'm going to apply restriction whenever the people try to create topics. And I'm going to put restriction on the number of partition and the replication factor. That way, if they are in the allowed range company-wide, they can be self-service and they can use whatever tooling they want. Because we are doing that, remember, at the protocol level. So if tomorrow they want to use the CLI, Conduktor UI, maybe a different UI, maybe another product, Kafka Streams or Kafka Connect, it will be the same. It will be enforced at the protocol level. So it will illustrate that. I'm trying to create a topic here with 100 partition and replication factor, and you can see that I get an explicit error that is saying, nope, you cannot do that. Right? And if I try to create the topic according to the policy, I will be able to create the topic and everything will work well. And what is important is that those rules can be company-wide, per tenant, or per application. So you can say company-wide, I would like to enforce this behavior. If you do not match with the behavior, let's discuss with Kafka experts, the central team. There is a valuable discussion. And if your need is legitimate, they can override the rule just for you, just for your application. Pretty cool. So if we can do that at topic creation level, we can obviously do that at when we try to change the configuration of the topic, like the retention, and we can put boundaries or restrictions on the list of attributes you can change. And we can try to provide guidance within the error message. If I try to put it with the correct retention, it might work. But as I said, right, as we are working, maybe you can do that as part of your CI/CD pipeline, or maybe you already have this kind of solution automated. But what if I tell you we can do that as well on the producer level or on the consumer level? Right? There is this parameter that is very important in Kafka, acknowledgement level. How can I enforce it? What about compression? I know this project is using crazy amount of data to us. How can I enforce that they use compression? Today, as a central team, you can't. And as you may know, acknowledgement default value has changed over the time on Kafka, and you might want to enforce that. So here we are going to say every time someone tries to produce to Kafka, we want to apply those restrictions. And if I try to produce, I will get an explicit error message. Again, we are working at the protocol layer. If I try to adjust my configuration to use compression and to use Axol, I will be able to produce messages like a charm. Okay, let's get rid of that policy. And now you understand that safeguard can be a great tool to kind of educate, and it can be configured in strict mode, like with errors you see, or in lenient mode, which means you can let the call pass to the real Kafka cluster. That way you don't disrupt application. But in both cases, you will log who did what. That way you can learn who is misbehaving, and you can educate them and help them. But the next step, if we talk about educating developers, is to talk about chaos. So we know that Kafka is resilient. There is plenty of documentation on the internet about that. But what about your application? Right? Is it properly configured or designed? I'm going to give a couple of examples, but if you are on premise and you are using Kafka, if you are having a critical application, you need to most probably have 24/7 support, right? So if the application crashes on a Friday night at 2 a.m., do you believe the central team will be able to fix the infrastructure issue in less than 2 minutes? kind of tricky, right? They need to go out of the bed, they need to connect to the VPN, check a lot of stuff. So most probably the answer is no. And why am I talking about 2 minutes? It's because it's the default application configuration in Kafka. And if outside of those 2 minutes, the problem remains, what will happen? Will your application explode in memory because you are using a weird client from the ecosystem? Will it handle the back pressure and block the thread and have side effect on your application? Will your application crash? Probably want to anticipate that problem. There is problem as well on poison pills, right? Do I know how to handle a message that I don't know how to deserialize? Or maybe I'm using Kafka Stream and I'm using join and aggregation. And all those technology, Flink, KSQL, Kafka Streams, are based on timestamp. So what will happen if one of the two sides of my join is a bit slower than usual? Will my join be predictable? Will it produce the necessary result that I was expecting? So again, let's switch to the demo and let's see all of that live. So let's create a topic. Let's push some data to it. Again, remember that I'm having natural chaos right now in my environment with my network, but you will be able to see that I'm able to produce data in Kafka. And what we are going to do is that we are going to ask the gateway to add a bit of random errors, right? And for that, we have millions of options. Can you please emulate that some brokers are timing out or not available, or that there is a gap if I'm using the idempotence, or that it's usually slower than normal. So if I try to connect again through the gateway, now that the gateway is configured for my application to inject those failures, I will see all sorts of errors, and I can make sure that my application properly handles them, right? In this case, you can see that I haven't been able to produce the data with the wrong level of acknowledgement, that I receive not enough replica exception, out of order exception, but all of those are retriable in Kafka. But for that, you need to make sure that your retry strategy or retry policy is properly configured. And that's what we can test here. Okay, let's get rid of this rule. Can it handle poison pill, right? Is my application able to survive if someone sent the data in a slightly different format that I was expecting? I was expecting JSON, someone changed the type of a field. Or someone by accident tried configuring a UI that didn't have the correct configuration, and they resulted pushing JSON instead of Avro messages. That's unfortunate. So how my application will react to that? Will it miserably crash? Will it route the error to error topic? Let's try to see what happens. So I can configure the gateway to try to insert random bytes at production time. And if I try to consume messages, you might see that this is not hello world, right? I've inserted or produced hello world, and the gateway has faked the data or impersonated you to try to put random bytes instead. And obviously the point is to make sure that your consumer can survive this poison pill. Okay, makes sense to everyone? For some reason, the chat is frozen on my side, James. Do not hesitate to interrupt.
It may be frozen on my side as well. I'm not sure if you can see that. Perhaps it's okay. But we're good. We're rolling again.
So all good. So it can also be used to do a bit of data lineage, right? When you are on the central team and you are having those use cases where you have a lot of producers writing into a topic, how can you know who produced the data? That information doesn't exist in Kafka. You have your producer configuration, then you have the data that you are pushing, and that's it. So maybe as an admin, I would like to have headers automatically added on the messages that will contain context information, like what was the IP of the producer and from which user/tenant this data was coming from. So again, I'm going to configure an interceptor. From an application point of view, it doesn't change anything, right? I'm just talking to Kafka. And when it goes through the gateway, we are going to augment the data. And you can see that here I have the IP of my producer, and I know that Tom was the tenant that was used to produce the data. This could be really useful from augmenting the data with metadata like correlation ID or stuff like that. You can have static headers. Some can be dynamic based on the context, but you got the point. So let's get back to the slides. Can this gateway help me with end-to-end encryption or data masking? So what could be the use cases, right? If you think about Kafka adoption, there might be a need quite often if you are freeing the data, especially if you are freeing referential or static data within your organization, there might be a need of making sure that only certain persons have access to specific fields. And in such a case, either you might want to mask it in order to make sure that certain application doesn't get access to the real value, or to a higher version of it, you might want to encrypt this data at the field level and make sure that specific fields are encrypted, which means you can do something with the value, like make sure that it's doing a count or unique or doing statistics, but you might not be able to know the exact value. So from an anonymization point of view, you are in a better position. And if you are using encryption, we can leverage the rest of the ecosystem, right? Because it's great to think about Kafka, but maybe you have a key management system like HashiCorp Vault, Azure Key Vault, or the other alternatives. So let's quickly try to illustrate that. I'm going to tell to the gateway, can you please, every time someone is trying to fetch the data from the Tom tenant topic, can you please to mask the road field with stars? And I want to mask the complete value, not just the beginning or not just the end, like in the case of a phone number or a credit card number. So if I try to consume from the topic, earlier we published data, and you can see that I have Paris, but the road field is masked at the application level, right? And keep in mind, you can do that on a per application basis. So you can decide without having to create a new topic, who can see the data. Maybe they are just interested into the volume and they don't care about the value of those fields. Let's mask the data for those people within the organization. So if we can do that with masking, we can obviously do that with encryption. And obviously it will work into the other way.
I'm wondering, Jean-Louis, one of the questions we got a lot at Kafka Summit in regards to encryption is, how does this solution compare to, say, Confluent encryption at rest?
Mm-hmm. So within Kafka, you have encryption in transit between your application and Kafka, but ultimately the data is not encrypted necessarily on the disk. If you think about Confluent offering, they have what they call an accelerator, which is not necessarily a product. It's something you can buy through professional services that can help you to encrypt fields. So it's very similar to what I'm going to showcase. But as far as I'm aware, right now, this accelerator is only available as a library. I know they have a plan to do something similar to us at the gateway level, but it's a library. And if it's a library, it comes with a lot of changes, right? How are we going to have reversibility between different languages, right? And also from a governance point of view, if it's at the application level, main advantage is that project can be autonomous. The difficulty is that we will need more coordination between the application, and the application will need to be properly configured.
As good as your least informed client or your least informed engineer, so to speak.
So here, I'm going to illustrate how we can encrypt fields. So I have this particular topic that is very key in my organization called roads. And these contain very sensitive information, like the name of the road. And I would like to encrypt that with an encryption key. And I would like that encryption key to be mapped to this particular algorithm that is in my KMS, like HashiCorp Vault or in-memory or Azure Key Vault. And I want to apply that at produce time. So application will be able to send the data as is. yes, it will work as well if you are using Avro or schema registry. The gateway is going to take the data, deserialize it, and apply the rules to encrypt what is necessary, what is relevant for you. So if we try to consume without doing anything, you might see that new messages that has been published are encrypted. So maybe you can do something with the value. But if your particular consumer, the particular application that is consuming it, really needs the data, you can configure through the gateway, through the API, can you please configure the opposite, right? The decryption. And as such, if I consume the same messages, I'm able to see the full content. So I have a version where it works with the schema registry. So let's create a topic. Let's apply multiple fields encryption. Let's push data using JSON schema, but it will work the same with Avro. And here, you can see that the data has been properly encrypted. And this is very important because if you think about customer data, most probably a lot of applications within your organization need customer data. But does everyone needs to be able to see the password or the visa? Maybe not. So here you have two options now, or three: do nothing, mask the data, or encrypt it. And maybe if you're having a business intelligence application, you want to do statistic to count the number of unique passwords. Or maybe you want to do statistic to make sure that you don't have duplicated accounts that are having the same security social number or same visa, right? But as such, to do the statistic, you don't need access to the real value. An encrypted hash, predictable, is fine. And maybe there is this application out there, the anti-fraud the fraud detection application that needs to get access to the visa, to the real value, to compare that with, I don't know, sensible accounts or whatever. But they still don't need to see the password. So this means we can go and apply decryption on a per application basis with different rules. Do you need to see the data fully encrypted, partially encrypted, or fully decrypted? So, okay, I have a question to see if you are still alive, because there are a lot of information today. Who got once in their life a project that tried to put, just write a +1 in the chat, a project that tried to put, for good or bad reason, large messages into Kafka? Does it happen? Yeah. So I'm going to say it like that, right? Out of the box, Kafka defaults to accepting messages up to 1 megabyte. And it's for good reasons. It's for performance reasons. If you have one-off messages, it might not be a problem. But from a fundamental point of view, whatever the limit is, 1 megabyte, 8 megabyte, 20 megabytes, if you have a fundamental fail in the design of your application, you might see those limits soon, right? If you get within your data unbounded array or unbounded list, there is soon a moment where you will hit the limit. And what are the alternatives? You can say, oh, I'm going to do chunking, message chunking. Yeah, it will work. It will just put a lot of complexity on the producer and the consumer. But message chunking will make the life of troubleshooting more difficult. Another alternative, very popular, recommended by Kafka experts all across the world or by other technologies, is to use claim check pattern. Let's just put the file, because at some point, if it's a large message, I call that a file. Sorry, I'm an old guy. But if it's a large message, maybe we can put that somewhere in a S3. And if it's there, we can just put a reference in Kafka. But again, it's going to make it difficult for application. What if I tell you we can do all of that within the gateway? Right? You can push your large payload, and central team can decide, okay, you are having these bad practices. I should have warned you in advance. But to try to unlock you and do some saving on the infrastructure costs, I'm going to configure the gateway to offload on the fly the data to S3 and just put the reference in Kafka. And I'm going to make that in a fully transparent manner for your application. So are you joking, Jean-Louis? No. Let's see it in action. I'm going to create a topic and call it large message. I'm going to create a bucket on min.io, which is a S3 solution that I can run locally. That bucket is ready. And I'm going to tell the gateway every time someone is pushing data to the large message topic, I'm going to offload that to this bucket in min.io. And if I generate large payload, 20 megabytes, it's going to be offloaded. So why 20 megabytes? It's because some cloud vendors like Confluent are putting a hard limit to 20 megabytes. So how will you work around with those limits? So here, I've been able to push the data. And if I try to read it back, the only thing I see in Kafka is a reference. And if I look in S3, there is a file that contains exactly that name, that contains either the large message or the batch of messages. So my footprint in Kafka is now very small. But to make it feature complete, can you guess? We need to tell every time someone is trying to consume, let's try to rehydrate the data on the fly. And if I consume it back, I'm able, from an application perspective, to read my 21 megabytes, even without being aware of what happened to my data. Amazing, right? And the last feature that I would like to showcase today is about unlimited partition. So if you think about all the things we've seen from the beginning of this call, we have a lot of features that can help you to do cost reduction. And I'm sure you are all aware of that, but one of the scalability factors in Kafka is partitions. Obviously, if you are Netflix and you are having 15 million messages per second, you probably need this amount of partition. But who, and please, again, play the game, type +1 if it happens to you, who sometimes needs to have significant amount of partition because our consumer application logic is long, right? We are doing heavy operations for good or bad reasons. Maybe you are asking to have 60 partition or 16 partition or 20, but you are having 1,000 messages per second. Who got that problem before? And obviously, from a cost point of view, from a central application point of view, it might just be that more topics, more partition means more infrastructure. And this is why they are trying to say, no, please reduce the number of partitions. So we are going to do something crazy here. So since the beginning of the demo, I've created a lot of topics, right? The one internal to Kafka, plus the one that we created with the cars, with the road, with the encryption, and so on. In total, in my Kafka cluster, I have 180 partitions. And what we are going to do is that we are going to tell the gateway, can you please lie to my consumer, to my projects, to my developers? Can you take the topic and virtualize them or concentrate them in the same physical topic with less partition than what they will believe exists? So you can have 10 topics with crazy amount of partition that can still scale from an application point of view, but behind the scene, you will be routing that to one physical topic with limited number of partitions because your goal is to try to manage the cost. And obviously, if there is unnecessary number of partition, it's going to have an impact on the cost. So because we are crazy, we are going to create, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense, a topic with 2,000 partition, and we are going to produce and consume from it. Yes, it works. We are going to create a new topic with 50,000 partition and produce and consume from it. And if we count again the number of physical partition in the real Kafka cluster, right? Please pay attention to this. I'm connected to my real Kafka cluster. I only have 187, which means I only added a few partitions. So how is that possible? I should at least have 52,000 based on what I just did, right? So let's reveal the magic. The gateway behind the scene has been concentrated as per my configuration in the demo. The routing to say that all the topics that were named unlimited something were going to be routed and concentrated in a topic called concentrated. And the gateway is adding some magic headers in order to guarantee that we know from which topic this data was coming from which partition, and yes, we will preserve the order. So if you are not a central team today, you might be puzzled by this, but this means that now central team can be equipped to accommodate some of your requests when you are changing them to have more partitions. Maybe they will decide and tell you, no, we won't move forward. But now they will have an option that will help them to mitigate your request without having prohibitive costs on the infrastructure layer.
Perfect. I'm sort of the time a little bit, Jean-Louis, because we've gone a little bit over the hour, but maybe we want to.
I'm just going to demonstrate the latency and wrap the call with you, James.
Perfect.
So for all of those features, every time that I've been presenting that to customer, there is this main question. What is going to be the impact on the latency? So what if I told you we can test that live? As part of the Kafka ecosystem, there is a tool called end-to-end latency that is producing a message, waiting for the acknowledgement, starting a consumer, and making sure that your message has been consumed. If I do that on my environment, locally, with my Kafka cluster, it takes on average less than 1 millisecond to talk to Kafka. I'm talking directly to Kafka. Now let's do the same through the gateway. You can see that the order of magnitude is very similar. Right? For all the magic that I showcased, we are just adding like what, 1 millisecond? Obviously, the latency depends on a lot of factors. If you are using simple stuff like safeguarding, like multi-tenancy, renaming on the fly, adding headers, it's almost transparent. But as soon as you are doing encryption or offloading things to S3, depending on your workload, the latency might be affected, but usually that's not where you might have the biggest workload. And yes, the gateway can scale either horizontally by adding more instances or vertically by increasing the CPU power in order to handle the workload. So there was a lot of features today, right? Let me just tell you what is coming. Tomorrow, probably around end of summer, mid-summer, we are going to release what we call merge cluster. It will be the capability to have one gateway that can serve multiple Kafka clusters. And this will allow use cases where application can be connected to one gateway that acts as a federated cluster. And based on mapping rules, you can be routed to the correct underlying cluster. So one example, you can talk as an application to the gateway, and maybe you have your customer topic and you would like to have a virtual topic called customer data from production. And behind the scene, we are routing that to your production and potentially applying encryption to try to anonymize the data. No need of replication. And if we can do that, it means that we can equip you tomorrow with use cases where you might need to have failover, right? So when you are having active-passive scenario, you have a master cluster, a backup cluster. You might be replicating the data between the both using mirror maker, cluster linking, replicator, those solutions, right? But there is still this challenge of reconfiguring the application. And here we can equip you by providing an API to make that switch almost transparent to your application. James, it's probably time to wrap all of that.
Yeah, amazing job on the demo, Jean-Louis.
Thank you.
That was awesome, very thorough. Last poll just coming through there. So everybody who stayed on to the end, please give your feedback. Obviously, we covered lots of things there. Would be great to understand what resonated with you the most. If you're interested in taking this further, if something sparked some interest, you'd like to have, let's say, a tailored demo, or conversation, then head over straight after this webinar to Conduktor contact, or this webinar is going to steer you directly over to a direct booking invite. If you're interested in getting started individually on your own, you can go over to the open source Conduktor Gateway repository on GitHub. If you're interested to see some of the, let's say, the features beneath the solutions we talked about today, as an example, like Safeguard, you want to see the specific functionalities that exist beneath that, such as checking when a schema ID is present, checking max number of partitions, then you can go over to the marketplace. The marketplace allows you to discover at a slightly lower granularity some of those functionalities within the different solutions. So yeah, pleasure to have everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. Amazing job, Jean-Louis, again. I think thanks from myself and all the audience. That was fantastic. And we hope to chat again soon. You have any closing comments, Jean-Louis?
Yeah, if you haven't replied yet, I would be curious if you can reply either in the chat or in the poll. What was the most amazing, exciting feature you saw today? What captured the most your interest?
Nice.
Thank you, Michael.
Awesome. I think we have covered all of the chat and all of the questions that we got in. So I think that's it for today. We will be back again to do a deep dive on one of these specific subjects based on the engagement in the polls. So thanks, everyone. See you later.